Do you watch reality TV? Is that something you're into at all?
No, but my wife does. So sometimes I get caught up in some of it, but I try to stay away from it if I can.
Why? Why don't you watch it?
I don't know. It's entertaining in the wrong way for me. And so I used to judge my wife for watching, like, why are you watching The Real Housewives? Like, what are you getting from this? Kind of like the murder podcast too. Like, she is getting something from it that I just don't get. So she might pick up signals, information, different things that my brain just can't perceive.
I really got into the Real Housewives for a while. And at first I got into it just because it's like, oh, you get to see this other world where people have lots of money and they spend tons of money on clothes and they get, plastic surgery. It's like, what do they do all day? I don't watch them anymore. And I'll tell you why, because over the course of watching them, they started to fight with each other. And I got really into that because it's such a fascinating psychological thing. So that a lot of their fighting revealed a lot of their insecurities. And then it just got very manufactured because the more they fought, the more people watched, right?
Mhm.
So the reason I ask this is because I think there's a connection between reality TV and what we're experiencing now in our country. And I know this sounds wild. Welcome to It's Interesting You Say That. Each week, we dive into personal strength, mental resilience, and emotional balance. I'm Jennifer Dillon, a nonprofit leader and resilience expert, and Tyler is a professional coach. We come from different backgrounds and different generations. I'm a bleeding heart liberal. He voted for Trump. But each week, we have a deep, meaningful conversation about the world today. We're glad you're here. But there's a really smart expert on authoritarianism. And one of the things that he says is that when we started as a country to get really into reality TV, and let's go all the way back to like Survivor, right? So we started to watch Survivor because it was like, okay, who's going to win? Who's going to survive? Who's the toughest and all that? And then I don't know if you ever watched that show, but then it got really into how are you going to trick people and fool them and deceive them so that you can become the winner? And that became true like for like Top Chef. There was a period of time in Top Chef too where it was all about like, I'm the toughest and I'm going to win. And I don't care I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to win. And we all got into that. Like, yeah, I got to win. And who do we love and who do we hate and all of that. With what I've said so far, can you see how that connects to where we are today? And that's not even bringing in the fact that Donald Trump himself is a reality TV person, right?
I feel like I can see where it's going.
So,
So
I mean, what do you think about that? Because I mean, you know me, and I know that you're a really kind-hearted person, but I just see a lot of cruelty being gamified. Like, get those Mexicans out of here because it's all about USA and we don't have to give them any money, right? And it's like, but these are actually real people. This isn't a game where, I'll let you respond. And I know you don't represent MAGA, and I don't represent like every liberal in the country, but I'm just like from a human perspective, who are we as people?
I think I first started liking Trump because this is going to sound bad, but because he was almost like you could see through it. Like, he's saying all this outrageous stuff and like some of it sticks, some of it doesn't. And it's like, oh, well, that's a good soundbite. That's kind of funny. And I think during his first term, like I didn't vote and I was just like, oh, well, like some of what, like there's a lot of stuff he's saying that's just kind of like, whatever. And then there's some stuff that he's saying, he's like, oh, well, like that's actually kind of reasonable. And I think going into this election, looking at a lot of the stuff he was saying, I was like, well, that's like super extreme, but like where's the dust actually going to settle on that? Like, I think, all the government employees, the layoffs or like the severance packages, they had some huge goal for how many people they wanted to leave. And I was thinking, okay, well, like maybe that brings a little bit more efficiency. Maybe that means things do get done a little bit quicker. Like maybe it's a little bit rash to try to get rid of that many people because we still need a functioning government. And then I think, I don't know, yesterday, sometime last week, I think they were coming in at maybe like only five or like they didn't reach the goal basically. And he said something to the effect of Like, hey, like we didn't, we're not getting all these people, but like it's good that we're kind of starting on this track or we're making things like a little bit more efficient. So then kind of seeing like that huge headline, super extreme, you get the views, you get the eyeballs, you get the attention, but then like where does it actually fall? And one of the reasons I actually voted for Trump was because I thought all the noise was just kind of like, I didn't like the noise. And so his first election, I was like, what is he actually doing? I'm not really paying attention. It seems kind of silly. It seems over the top. But then during Biden's election, I guess it was easy to do this. Like in hindsight, it was like, okay, well, that policy actually worked kind of well. Or like, hey, like that thing over there was kind of good. So like he was saying all this stuff, but then like some actual things that got done were decent things. And I'm actually seeing now the same thing with Biden's election. Like he's old, he has dementia, he can't think, someone's pulling the strings behind his back. Well, like, no, not everything he did was great. And no, maybe didn't get the eyeballs that Trump did. But like looking back on some of the things he did, it's like, okay, well, he actually did that. And that was actually pretty good. And it actually kind of led me back to the conclusion this go around. Like, I'm kind of disillusioned again. Like the whole thing with, the U.S. and we're going to take over Gaza or like we're going to get the strip or like all this confusion about it. I was like, well, that sounds like that's just the continuation of Biden's term. Like that doesn't sound like anything different than the narrative like we've kind of been going on.
Yeah.
And then it kind of made me realize, well, there's all this stuff going on to get views and eyeballs and reelected and, all these coalitions or these partnerships. And then there's actually what's really happening. Like we were watching the other day, one of the press conferences with the energy people. So he had like maybe 4 or 5 people from doing energy. And he was saying, we're going to bring back energy. We're going to do all this stuff. And then my wife wanted to click on the headline that was about 5 minutes, but then there was one that had the whole thing. I think it was about 37 minutes. And I said, look, well, you know what? We have some time. Let's just watch it verbatim. And we did. And then afterwards, they said everything that they were going to do. And I was like, wow, like maybe it's a good time to invest some money into the energy markets. Like, because it seems like they're preparing for a whole bunch of stuff, but just getting it from the horse's mouth and not the headline, I think. And then also recognizing that the system, kind of like reality TV at first, like it's real. Like it's actually real. You have to create something real. You can't create a show about nothing. But then once the producers figured out, hey, like if they argue or if they fight, we're going to get a lot more views. And then you just start manufacturing that just for the views. And so you get the ad money and you get everything else. And I think there are 2 things that you kind of have to watch out for. Like what's just the news and what's just for the eyeballs and views and what's actually really happening. Because if you look at that, like you can have a real conversation and actually plan your actions off of that rather than looking at the headlines. So it's confusing.
It is confusing. And I don't know if you saw it, but I interviewed a professor from the University of North Carolina about how to spot fake news. How do you parse it down? And just to really quickly, for people who are listening who don't want to have to watch the whole podcast, it's basically read the headlines, but make sure you're getting it from a source who is paid, who makes money off of being right, not off of how much they can get you to like clickbait, get you to watch and because of their ads and whatever. So find sources that get paid for being right. So like AP News, PBS, NPR, those kind of things. But he said they're boring. And that's why people don't watch them, because they take a long time. They take, very complicated stuff. So you have to, he said, just get what he calls literate. Just spend time, like what you and your wife are doing, like spend time just, going through the headlines from good sources. And then if something doesn't seem right, then you check it with like PolitiFact or, there's quite a few that are reputable. Again, they make money off of being right, not make money off of getting you to click. So anyway, just that's a side. But it sounds like what you're saying is that a lot of this stuff that freaks me out, that it feels like it's overblown. It's like people are making it bigger than it is in order to get those clicks and everything. But when you shake down everything that Trump is doing, it's actually, there's a lot of reasonable stuff behind it. Am I characterizing what you're saying right?
Yes, there's also a lot of unreasonable, maybe not unreasonable, but maybe things that I don't personally agree with. But I don't give myself that opportunity unless I look at, like you said, I don't do my own due diligence and see what actually happened, and not just, I read further than the headline,
Right.
which oftentimes I don't, to be honest.
Yeah, who has the time, right? The time, and also it's just like you said, it's very confusing. You're going to find somewhere, someplace, someone's going to say that side is wrong, and then you're going to go and find another, this side is wrong. So how do you know what's true? It's a big problem, and I think it's been really weaponized against us as a country. Like, we have been manipulated by lots of powers out there that really make money off of us fighting each other, just like a reality show. America right now is a big fat $330 million people reality show, right? I mean, the rest of the world sees it that way. I know people live overseas and they're like, man, you guys are so entertaining, but you're also really scary because, so many people rely on us to be a stable force in the world. And we are completely insane right now, and it's not like we haven't gone through this before. We didn't, and what I'm talking about is a period around the Civil War where it just, one person, one side took their side. And I don't think I shouldn't even say that because I don't want to, I'll beep it out because I don't think that's the direction that anybody should be talking about. But this guy, his name is Jared Yates Sexton, who is an authority on like tyranny and how it happens. He said that the thing about reality TV is that when it started up, it became very attractive to people because of the things that we were talking about, kind of getting into the psychology and all of that. But it really got us into a place where we could be okay with cruelty to other people and get kind of inured to it, to get numb to it. And that this is really, if we really want to focus on what's right for this country, is to get away from left and right and all that and just get very very basic. I remember you did this. You did a video once about love and fear. That kind of like if you scraped everything down to the essentials, we are either chasing love or trying to get away from fear. And they get intertwined. And I feel like if we got to the bottom of like, the most liberal, like, oh my God, the world is falling apart, you're going to find underneath there a lot of fear of, you're going to do something bad to me. And a lot of searching for love in terms of, I want to feel accepted for my different views or my differences that I have. And I would suspect that underneath, even the most rabid MAGA person, you're going to find someone there who's full of fear and also seeking love, just like everybody else. And I think that those two things get manipulated. And how can we start to unravel that so that we get to the bottom of why, just like in a reality TV show, it's like, why did Kyle go after what, I can't remember their names anymore, but why did this, one character go after another? Well, because the other, the character attacked her husband. Well, why does that bother her if she's so, well, maybe deep down she isn't very secure about her husband and her relationship. And she's afraid that people calling it out is going to make her really vulnerable and it's going to open up those questions about her marriage that she doesn't want to look at. Do you get what I'm saying? I mean, does that make sense? That let's kind of get to the bottom of what we all want as human beings, and maybe that'll help us understand what's happening as a country.
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. One, like I don't know where the saying comes from, but basically, if you want to hide something from people, put it in writing. And maybe the contemporary version. The contemporary version might be something like, if you want to hide something from people, like, just put it in the full length clip, because people just aren't going to watch it. And this kind of led me to think maybe where we went wrong with reality. With reality TV, we know it's entertainment. We even if we're getting all this information or we're looking at the dynamics between the people in the show, we know its purpose is entertainment. But when you go to the news or you go to like the official president's Twitter page, and it's supposed to be informative, it's supposed to be factual, it's supposed to be leadership, and now you're trying to mix in the entertainment. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how ethical that is. It makes it very difficult for people to, well, one, have access to good information, but two, it forces people to work harder, which might be like maybe not such a bad thing now that I say it out loud, but the reality is a lot of people just aren't. Like, you're going to get the headline, or you're going to get the reel, or the YouTube clip, or you're going to watch the 10-minute video instead of the 2-hour long press conference. And I think with most people with real lives are going to choose to do that, because if you can get, if you feel like you can get in 5 minutes what you would have to get in 2 hours, like, why would you spend the 2 hours?
Yeah, well, but it is entertaining. Did you hear about the Elon Musk thing this weekend about his new kid?
No, I didn't.
So apparently he has another baby with another woman, not with Grimes. And I guess she had the baby like 5 months ago. And then, do you know who Milo Yiannopoulos? I can't even say his name. Do you know who he is, Milo? He's like a gay MAGA guy. So anyway, she and he got into it on Twitter or on X, and he was criticizing her for something, I don't know. And she accused him of posting a picture of her when she was 15 years old. Okay, so this all plays out on X. So Elon Musk responds at some point. And then she responds to Elon Musk saying, I've been trying to get a hold of you. Why don't you talk to me? Like, she's the baby mama. So it's all this like drama, played out on X. And everyone's attention's averted to that because, of course, it's fascinating. It's reality TV playing itself out. And that is sufficing for our national conversation. Meanwhile, he's firing all these people. And one thing that really gets me is what he fired everybody in USAID. I grew up in USAID. My dad worked for USAID. So I understand USAID, know about it. I know what happens in USAID. And I don't think people understand. And I don't think they even understand what USAID is. So my dad was an agronomist. So he was a soil scientist, and he would go to countries like Chad. We lived in Mauritania, for example, Yemen. The work that he would do is to try to teach some of the farmers. He would, test the soil and say, these are some of the compounds that we can add to the soil so that you can grow crops, so you can sustain life in your country because it's, an arid desert or whatever. Now, when I was a teenager and I saw what he was doing, like, I actually had, I don't know if I still have it, I have a picture of me cutting the ribbon on a farming station in Mauritania, in Nuanced, and with the president of the country standing next to me and smiling and everything. And, it was kind of a big thing that was on the news and whatever. And the purpose of it was to have, show this is what America is doing for this country. Now, what that did is, number one, it showed that the United States was benevolent and kind and wanted to do the right thing. But underneath it all, there were a lot of people who worked for USAID who were known as information officers. What is an information officer? They gather intelligence. They don't do it by spying and all of that. They get to know people. So they build relationships with people in that country so that they can say, well, we know that there's this tribe out here that wants to do this thing. We know that there's going to be a water issue over here. We know that there's a pandemic breaking out potentially over here. And so they can deal with it, but they also build those relationships so that if there's somebody coming up into power who is going to be anti-American, they can manipulate, right? Which is the United States does. And sometimes it goes over the line. And it's a bad manipulation. So, as you know, my mother is from Chile. So most of my relatives grew up under Pinochet, who United States installed and was a terrible person. So there's good and bad there. But that's what USAID does. And nobody is coming out and saying this is how USAID could have stopped a pandemic, could have stopped a dictatorship, could have, So there's a lot of good things that can't come out of it. But all people see is we're giving money to these people that are not Americans. And not see that you are giving 1% of our total GDP, or not a GDP, our budget, that does things that help the United States and could save us trillions of dollars, billions of dollars in aid that will have to go, or worse, wars, right? Look how long it took me to explain that. And were you like, God damn it, I wish she'd stopped. Because it takes a long time to explain these complexities. How do we not turn it into, a simple headline Trump fires 200,000 workers around the world, or however many it was, 30,000 or whatever, versus let me explain to you how complicated things actually are.
Well, I'm thinking don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
That's it right there. Yes.
So in your description of USAID, I was thinking, wow, like that's a really good thing to do. But then also, it also puts us in a position where we have control that can be utilized incorrectly in the wrong hands.
Sure.
Which is not good, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep doing the good stuff. And I think that extreme notion to just like get rid of it, cut the fat, like just end it is like, well, hold on here. Maybe there are some things that we can fix, or maybe there are some things that can be better, but let's not stop doing the things that are actually producing fruit for us and the nations that we have partnerships with.
Right.
And my personal view on some of the policies that Trump's putting in all these executive orders is, I understand, move fast, break things, or, you got to mix it up. And I do think a lot of change is needed. I do think one thing that is good is that change is at least happening. But I also, in my personal experience, I'm not sure if this applies to a national level, but if you try to do things too fast, especially when you don't exactly know what you're doing, or you haven't taken the time or really sorted out the intentions behind doing it, then you're going to get something that you weren't expecting that could be worse than the initial benefit you were thinking you were going to get.
Right.
And at scale.
But they did it for shock and awe. They did it because it establishes power. It establishes we're in charge. We can do whatever we want to. We're going to test every single little lever of power, and we're going to pull it, and we're going to win because we're willing to pull those levers of power. That's how I see it. And again, we come back to, there's like two ways to message things. There's what I just explained, which was USAID is a benefit to the United States. Here's how. Here's how it's going to benefit you personally. And then there's another argument that can be made that USAID is out there helping people to not starve, to not get ill, to not fall under soldiers coming at them with machetes. So we're actually doing good to not help people. So again, you see the difference between, and I think this is what has come out when we have conversations, is that I think there are two ways of looking at a problem. How does it affect me? And then how does it affect other people? And I don't think that the news does a good enough job of talking about both. And I think because and this is where I think there's a difference between, the ultimate difference is that people who vote for Trump often see things in terms of how is this going to affect me, which is a perfectly valid way of looking at the world. And I think people who vote for, Kamala were like, how can I show that I care about other people, right? Some of them were like, how does this affect me? Because I have a relative who's an immigrant, for example, or something. But there's such a marketing messaging problem that we have, that we're not recognizing how those two things can be played against each other. Because I know that you're not somebody who's like, I don't care about what happens to other people. And I'm somebody who does care about what happens to me too. I want to know how it's going to affect me personally. You see what I'm saying? Like, we're not connecting those two things.
Well, yeah, it's a loop. Eventually, the war or the fight down the street is eventually going to get to your house. So if you don't care about what's going on with other people, like eventually it will get to you. But at the same time, if you don't have your own house in order, like, you can't really help anybody in the first place. So I think they're two very connected ideas. And instead of looking at it from a connected and unified perspective, the news just separates it and says it's this versus this, instead of these two things working together.
So there's like neutral headlines, which is what this professor talked about. There's neutral headlines, which is what you look for, where it says, here's just what happened. X amount of people were fired from USAID. And then it's up to us to figure out, what does that mean to me? And what does that mean for other people? And if I hurt other people, will it come back to me? If I only care about myself, will it hurt other people? And I think if we looked at the world that way, we could unravel some of the complexity that seems to be in these conversations, and then come to a conclusion that makes a lot of sense. Because like you said, you could look for something that's going to be good for you, and then realize, well, even though it's good for me, it's going to come back at me because it's going to hurt like 10 people down the street. And eventually that's going to come back at me.
So I'm thinking of my kids. Yeah, like I can just stomp out, a tantrum or just be like, nope, we're not doing that. And you're like, yes, that solves the immediate issue. But in 10, 15 years, I'm going to have a hell of a time with that kid because of the way I dealt with things when they were 2.
Exactly. Exactly. That is exactly. I mean, I see that. I remind myself of that every day, that there are things that I want my son to do, and I hold back on how I say I want him to do that, or whether I even say it, because I'm looking at, he's 18 now. I'm looking at 10 years, 20 years from now. Am I establishing an adult one-on-one relationship with him so that we can have a relationship when he's, because I have seen, I don't know, I think about this a lot, how many people I know who have turned around, left their families, and never looked back. Yeah, I see my mom like once a week. I mean, once a year, or, I take the kids to see them, like it's been 2 or 3 years since. And that to me is really sad.
I think that's one of the scariest. Well, I think you might be in a different stage of parenthood where it's a lot scarier because when they're 2, it's not like, how much trouble are they really going to get in? Yeah. As long as they don't go bump their head on a rock in the backyard, we're good. But it is scary to, I think, even at this stage, just knowing like you're going to have to make your own decisions. Yeah. And like, I want to be there as much as I possibly can. And I want to steer you in the right direction all the time, but you still have to make your own decisions. And I was one of those people who wanted to cut my parents off and just move on. And, thankfully my wife kind of came in and said, like, maybe you should try to look at this from a different perspective. And, the relationship is pretty good now. And my kids have grandparents now. But I think they wanted the best for me so much that I ended up like countering that and said like, no, I have to figure it out for myself to the extreme. And then that caused even more problems. But then eventually I had to come back to be like, well, what they were saying was right. And like, I kind of had to find my way back to it. But I think a lot of that can just be canceled out if you just communicate from the jump. It's like, if you don't read the headline, if you don't jump to the immediate emotion on both sides.
Yes. That's right. You can't be like bleeding heart liberal and say you're hurting everybody. You have to wait and say, wait a minute, how is this actually going to hurt other people? And also then, how is it going to hurt me too? I have to say that there's a part of me that has said, yeah, everything is being shaken up right now. And I think it's scary because, like I was saying, we went out to like a family dinner, and there were 3 kids under the age of 23. And my older brother was kind of trying to talk to them about, okay, because he's in tech. He's like, okay, here's the things that you should be really focusing now if you want to have a job later on, because this is where the direction of the economy is going. Nobody can really understand what's happening with the economy. But in the shakeup, there could be a lot of good things that come out for me personally, in terms of the work I want to do or how the economy is going to be and things like that. There's one thing that I see that I think is very interesting. And I think that the United States has been on a course of diminishing power in the world because China has risen in power. And it's possible that a lot of what is being done right now is shaking up that world order. What was happening was these BRICS companies, Brazil, India, China, Russia, and there's another one, that have been forming this group that really kind of challenges NATO, challenges the United States and Europe and that dominance there. And I think what Trump is doing is really just like throwing a bomb into that world order. And that could be a terrible, terrible thing, obviously. I think just on the face of it, it's like, what the are you doing? But there could potentially be a lot of good things that come out of it, which is what you were talking about the other day about karma. You got to look at the dark and say, where is the light in it? Because sometimes throwing a bomb in something can be terrible, but it could end up being an okay thing or a good thing even to shake things up. But it comes down to the fact that other people will suffer. And are we okay with that? And is it okay that we're so used to reality TV that we see suffering and we just say, well, that's, that was interesting. Turn off now, time to go to bed, turn off the TV or whatever. Like, this is real, you know?
One of the most difficult things for me is there's always, it doesn't have to be always, because I guess you can optimize, but there tends to be suffering on both ends. And like, if I make this decision, these people will suffer. If I make this decision, these people suffer. Or if I make this decision, I'll suffer. And then like, no one wants the suffering. And so I think to some extent, it is like, these people will suffer if I make this decision. But then also, like you said, if you don't get that other half, or you just read the headline, like, you're unaware of who else will suffer if the opposite decision is made, or you're unaware of how it will affect you or your neighbors. And I think it's done that way to kind of create emotional exhaustion, because if you're so caught up with the emotions and the surface level fact, then eventually you'll just side or go with, well, typically the marketing that you see the most, or the marketing that makes the most compelling emotional case, and not necessarily what's actually best for other people or what's best for you.
Yeah, what you're bringing up is this idea, I think we've talked about it a little bit before, which is, this is what neurolinguists do. So here's what the theory of neurolinguistics is, that the way in which our brains work is we create patterns or frames so that we don't have to think every time we do something. Like, there's a framework for how we go to school. You know, you go to class and you sit down and da-da. There's a framework for how you go shopping. You go around the store, you pick out what you want, you go pay for it. So those are kind of simple frameworks that, you know what to do. You don't like enter the store every time and go, what should I do? Should I ask someone to go get the stuff for me? You know, there are some countries where you walk in the store and you tell them this is what I want, and they go get it, and you're at a counter and they give it to you and you pay for it there. So we have certain frames for how we do things. Well, if you take that to more complicated things, he says, this is George Lakoff. He's a neurolinguist. I think he's retired now, but he was at UC Berkeley. And he said that we have what's called the strict father, which we've talked about before. So basically, it's this idea, and it's not just Christians, it's a lot of religions, and it's a lot of just philosophically, people believe this, that there is, kind of a spiritual head. So, God, and then there's the father that comes next. So this is a patriarchal system, of course. And the father is in charge of the family and making sure that the family is doing things right, and that the moral and all of that. So what I think a lot of people have done, and this is not just true of Trump, this can be true of any leader, is that instead of doing what you were talking about, which is, really understanding that there's complexity here and I have to look at it and, understand it and parse out how it works for me versus how it works for other people, that people will just say, look, they're not maybe aware of it, I'm subscribing to the strict father framework. So Trump is the dad. And you see this now where people are like, daddy's home and daddy's going to take the belt out now on people. You've seen that, like some of those creepy guys that are out there talking like that. But a lot of people are okay with that because it's comforting to think that there is a guy on top who you don't have to think about this. He's going to take care of it for you. And then what happens further down the line is that the woman is subservient to the man. So you see a lot of, the way that like women will dress and things like that. It's a lot about being sexual in a certain way. And then the kids are you have to do what we tell you to do. You're not gay, you're not trans, you go to the right schools, you follow the framework that we have with, the religious framework, whatever. And this can be in Muslim societies, this could be in Christians, there's lots of different models of this. So what happens though is that when something happens to the person who is in that system, so let's say that they get hurt by Trump's policies, for example, a lot of people are like, okay, that's all right. They don't mind being hurt by the policies because they see it as, well, daddy is hurting me, but it's for my own good. So I might lose my job, or like I'm a farmer and I might lose my, my water or the subsidy that I got. Like a lot of these farmers actually grew food for USAID and they don't have that contract anymore. But they're like, well, daddy knows best, so it's okay. And then if they see daddy hurting somebody else, a sibling, a brother, a sister, well, that's what dad's supposed to do. He's supposed to hurt other people because they were getting out of line. And that's more dangerous than the pain. Like we got out of line. We started thinking about other countries and other people and thinking they were as important as us. And daddy's going to set that right. What do you think of that theory?
I think it is comforting. Like the thought of like safety and security and like you don't have to do the thinking or like you don't have to do the fighting is always very comforting. I've never seen it in my personal life go well. It's like, okay, I'll give this person the control, or like, okay, I'll let them then make the decisions. Like, okay, like I'll let this go. And I'm not saying that means like I need to be the one in control. I need to make the decisions, but it at least needs to be a collaboration.
Yeah.
Because always like it just doesn't work that way. Like you still have to be your own person. And I think a good leader doesn't have to do much because under a good leader, the people lead themselves. Once the people can lead themselves, there doesn't need to be a leader. Like raising the kids, like, yes, I want to be a good role model. I want to be a good dad. I want to do all that stuff. But eventually they're going to be their own parents or they're going to be their own people. And I'm not going to control them. And so the best way isn't to always impose structure and to impose routine, impose what I think is best, and to, while they're young, teach them how to make their own decisions so that they can go out and successfully do that. And they don't need a dad. They don't need a mom. They have us. We're here. We love you. We're here always.
Yeah,
but you have everything you need to do it on your own. Maybe that's not realistic on a national scale with presidents and kings and everything, but ideally a natural emergence of what is right and what we should do kind of pops up. And maybe that's like an idealistic thing that should only be in like households or families or whatever, but that would be nice. It would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand why people would want that kind of framework. I mean, a lot of people didn't even choose it because they grew up in it. Like we go to church and or we go to temple or we go to mosque and this is how we look at things. And you don't even, it's like invisible, you don't even know that you're in that frame of thinking. And so when it gets challenged for a lot of people, it's very scary because then what do you have? I mean, like I can tell in your relationship, for example, with your wife, that you have very much of a co-relationship. You support each other. You have disagreements, but you work through them together. You're not like, you do this and she obeys, and it doesn't sound like she's telling you what to do either, that you really are working through it and having that kind of that complexity in your relationship. And then you're teaching it to your kids how to do that.
To me, that's kind of like if you want to hide somebody, you put it in writing. And it's like it takes the extra work to work together. It's easy to tell somebody to do something. And then I think for men in particular, like it's easy to force somebody to do something.
Yeah.
But that doesn't go anywhere. And I think for women too, because maybe more in a manipulation sort of way. I think men and women have different strengths physically and psychologically. And so that can turn like horribly ugly.
Yeah.
But if you come together and you work on something and you actually like we had an argument this morning about how I was going to get the kids ready for bed last night and say, brush your teeth, we'll change diapers, and then you guys can come back, do what you're doing, and we'll go to bed. Normally we just do it all at once, like brush your teeth, change diapers, read a story, go to bed. And I told my wife I was going to go take a shower, and then after I'm going to ask if they want something to eat, because sometimes they'll say like, I want to eat right before bed to stay up longer. So I said, I'm going to get ahead of that tonight. Ask, do you want something to eat? No? Okay. Let's go brush your teeth. I told him a couple of times. My son didn't want to, but he was like, all right. Like he goes to brush his teeth. My daughter just keeps coloring. She's coloring at the table. I take her. She's throwing a tantrum. She tries to run to her mom. I pick her up. I take her. I go brush her teeth. She tantrumed the whole time. We get to her room and then I pause. We talk. And like she says, I'm sad. I want to color. I'm like, I know, but we're going to change the diaper first and then we're going to go. Do you want to hold the toy while we change your diaper? No. Do you want to pick out your pajamas? Yes. Okay. Everything's good. We go back. My wife thought I just committed a mortal sin. She thought I could have added more intention in telling my daughter, like my son understood but taking a little bit more time helping my daughter understand that this is what we're going to do so she doesn't have to cry or throw a tantrum. I thought like, hey,
Like
like
more
it's not,
like transition stuff. Like, okay, this, like that kind of, yeah, like warning,
yes.
and then here's what's going to happen. And yeah.
See, I thought I told him a couple of times, all right, let's go. She's like, she didn't understand it the way that you said it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could try to say it a different way, so you're not ripping her from what she's doing,
Mm-hmm.
and she's confused. So this morning we held court in the house. Like I wrote down my how I thought everything went. She wrote down how she thought everything went. We called the kids in. You know, they're 2 and 3, so they're thinking, oh, we're playing court. We know we're doing whatever. And I said how I thought everything went. She said her piece. You know, I asked my son, like, do you think Dad was being mean last night? And he was like, he he said no. He was like, no, like Mela just needed to go brush her teeth. But my daughter was like, yeah, Dad was being mean. And you know, they went off and to go play. But then me and my wife had a deeper conversation. But the tricky part was there was the actual thing that happened, the actual tangible thing that happened, and then another argument sprouted from how we were communicating about it. And we've done this before, but it could be so easy to like, here's the actual thing that happened. And now we're mad at each other because how we said how something happened or how we brought it
Mm-hmm.
up. And now we're mad that we can't get our emotions out. And now we're blaming and now we're doing all this. So this time we didn't do that. And we just kind of addressed the communication issue. So then we could address the actual issue with the parenting. And we said, okay, you know, we shook hands, we hugged, we got over it. But it took about, from last night to today, probably about 3.5 hours in total.
That's a whole reality TV episode right there. Seriously. I mean, and then, you know, you can take that example, and what you're talking about is that there's the surface that happens, and then underneath it, there's all these emotions that happen. And your wife was kind of relating to your daughter and saying, you know, like, it's hard to transition like that. She didn't understand it. You just, you know, ripped her away from some. And you were, and your son, maybe your son, you know, maybe kind of understood you a little bit better. Maybe it's like a boy versus girl thing where girls need more, like, it's my feelings. I was doing something creative and you just destroyed that. And he's like, okay, whatever. What do you want? Okay, you know, and it's just so fascinating. And uh, I keep bringing up all these experts because I'm just really studying all this stuff. But I went to a Zoom call with a woman who is a professor of psychiatry at Yale. And she really looks at, you know, issues around narcissism and psychopathy and things like that. And I'm going to wrap this up, and I just want to, you know, kind of give this perspective. And one of the things that she said is, and I've been saying this for a while too, is that in order to evolve as people, the next stage of our evolution is not, you know, that we're going to grow scales or something like that. It is that we have awareness now of how our brains and our bodies work. And we have to become, all of us need to become more specialized in psychology, in our own psychology and the psychology of other people. And we can do that now because we have information. And AI can help us with that because you can, you know, ask what certain behaviors mean. And is that something that's a problem? Or how do you work with somebody who has that kind of behavior? And I think what you've been teaching your kids, and you and your wife are doing this, is you're diving into that. You're saying we are psychological people and we have to have these conversations and swim around in it, even though we don't understand each other, whether it's male, female, or it's, you know, I have a certain style of, you know, or I'm more empathetic or I'm more authoritarian or whatever, and get to the bottom of why we have these differences instead of just like, you know, it's black and white. We fight or we get along. It's not, it's never that easy. And it's never that easy. Like, you know, you just care about yourself and I only care about like the pain of other people. I think we have to break through all of that and realize that we're all human beings and we all have all of these things inside of us. And so much of it either is about seeking love or avoiding fear. And sometimes the two are doing the same thing at the same time, which is very confusing.
I almost forgot my point in telling the story, but you reminded me. It's the strict father model. It's easy to go with not only because you get safety and security, but also because like who who wants to have a 3.5 hour ordeal about brushing teeth?
Yeah.
Like 5 times a week. It's easier to just cut out the time and have someone just say like, okay, we're brushing the teeth and that's it. It's harder. I think just as much as maybe the blame is on the strict father for ruling that way when it's not maybe the best way. Like there is a responsibility of the people being ruled or the people who are not in the power position to say, to fight, I guess, to say, hey, that's not right. And I deserve an equal amount of the power and decision-making here. And maybe that's what we were trying to go for with democracy. In reality, it doesn't always work that way. So I think you end up with more or less a strict father and then people who are with him and then people who are fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people start fighting with each other.
Yeah.
When that's not exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Are we supposed to fight the father? Are we fighting? Why are we fighting ourselves? I guess like we're the kids, right? In that model. Why are we fighting ourselves? That's really what I'm concerned about. And can we influence the father if we voted for him and he's there? I didn't vote for him, but but he's there. And how do we, as the kids in the model, say no? We're not going to do that. How can we be more like your daughters? Is like, do not drag me away from the things that I love. And what do we do when people are like, that's okay, I'm going to just go along? I don't know. It's a more complicated, further discussion, but I think that's really where we're at. And hopefully we can start to unravel some of that. And I just really appreciate having these conversations because I don't think people that I see are having these conversations with each other in a way that isn't like, you just don't believe in facts, or, or you're just, go on with your, Russia, all that kind of stuff. And we're not having these deeper conversations about who we are as people.
Yeah, I'm thankful that we have the space to do that. It's it is very uncommon in my immediate life to see that as well.
Yeah. We're just fighting each other. We got to stop that. Hopefully we can contribute to people stopping that. Thanks for listening. We hope you'll subscribe for weekly podcasts about building personal strength, mental resilience, and emotional balance. You can also find free tools, resources, and quizzes at bbgtv.org. That's bbgtv.org.